right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's session of Will You Accept This Rant? We are Kendall and Linnea, and we are here to talk about what we see with love and relationships and consent and everything else that we might need to know about as seen under the microscope of Bachelor Nation. So
Mm-hmm.
we had a very exciting week. Let's see, this episode, we had a one-on-one date with Zach C.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel their chemistry, but Tasha
No,
is.
some people do.
Also, those wedding photographs were atrocious.
So awkward. And I don't know. Yeah,
They
I
look like
wasn't
something
a big
like from
fan.
the 90s that would be on MySpace, like not a
Yeah.
professional photographer that we hired to shoot a $1,000 photo shoot who had to quarantine for 2 weeks to come and do this. Like,
Yeah, that poor guy. I mean, so
and the
awkward.
suits on Zach, like they were poorly
They were
fitted.
so
They
big.
were so bad. Like he looked so bad, and the photos looked so bad. I was like, this
Yeah,
is not.
Tasha looked great,
Oh, she
even
always
in some
does.
of those
Yeah.
ugly dresses,
Yeah.
but
She can make
Zach needed
anything
some
look
work.
good, but yeah, so we had the terrible photograph date with Zach C, and he started to open up about his history. Like Tasha, he'd been married before, he'd
Mm-hmm.
gotten divorced, he'd struggled with addiction, and went through rehab, and now works on the board of a rehab center. So really just a really inspiring story, a really open story
Mm-hmm.
about addiction and the disease of addiction. So we got to see that moment between Zach and Tasha, and then we had a group date where the guys explored their artistic sides, and then we just had a Noah and Bennett drama
We
for.
had another
Oh,
one-on-one
we had
date with
another
Easy
one-on-one date
too.
with Easy. That's right, the ghosts,
Yeah, that was
the
fun.
haunted La Quinta.
That seems super fun. I liked
Yes,
that.
yes. I would like to be the staff member that has to like go around and make ghost noises and stuff.
Yeah, to scare them for
That's
sure.
probably not what you think you're gonna have to do with your life when you get hired on as the hotel manager for the La Quinta resort. But
No, no. And
weird times in the pandemic.
we took a little break from Chris Harrison too this week, which
Yes, we had JoJo back, which you've never
I
seen
don't know her.
JoJo
No,
before. What did you think about her?
I mean, she wasn't on very much. I thought she was nice. I
Just
mean,
as
I
much
don't
as
know.
Chris, just as useless as Chris Harrison
Yeah,
usually is.
I did miss Chris Harrison though. He's been funny this season
He
with
has been
his
involved.
running around with his margaritas, his late night wine session with Ed.
Right.
He's growing on me.
I liked the moment though where Noah tried to flirt with JoJo and she just like was not having it. He's
Yes.
like fixing his hair in the mirror. She's like, "Oh, what do you like? How does your hair look?" He's like, "Why don't you tell me how my hair looks?" She's
Yeah.
like, "It's fine."
Yeah.
Like
I did love
not
that.
having it. I'm like, dude, she's engaged to Jordan Rogers or Aaron Rodgers or some Rogers that doesn't play for the Packers. So
Oh, definitely not Aaron Rodgers.
yeah, I actually don't think they get along. That's a whole nother story. That's in a whole nother side of
Another
Bachelor
video.
Nation. Another, we'll talk about the Rogers family some other time. So yeah, so that's kind of what happened this episode. I don't know. What did you think? I found it another enjoyable episode.
Yeah,
A lot of really good things.
mostly it was enjoyable. I
Can we
think
talk
that
about the
there's
bad things before we get to the good things?
yeah. The biggest thing, so I know last week I complained a lot about Noah. I thought Noah was such a huge jerk, and I still think Noah is a jerk, but Bennett topped him this week. So they've had some weird, I don't even understand what it is.
How
They've
did they
kind
get
of
this
been
beef going?
yeah, some weird beef going. Like Bennett had told Noah he was like arguing with a 14-year-old, just some really rude comments. And I feel like it kind of stemmed from there. But Bennett to me just seems so arrogant, so condescending. He shared a gift with Noah that I felt was really mean. Like he
Yeah.
just seemed like he was picking on Noah and just kind of trying to pick at all those weak spots that he had. And I really hated it. And I don't think that he recognizes that he's acting the way he is. I think Bennett thinks he's in the right. But what I like about it, we kind of ended the episode in a cliffhanger. Tasha definitely can see what's going on between them and she's not going to stand for it. Because
Mhm.
chances are, if someone's acting like that and acting so arrogant and just blatantly rude to people in their lives, they're probably not going to be the best partner down the road. So I'm glad that she's going to kind of get rid of one or hopefully both of them, but
Yeah, hopefully both.
we'll see what happens. And I know you liked
I mean,
Bennett.
I have been a Bennett defender since like day one. I thought he was funny. I thought he was, he was clearly like a privileged rich boy. But I thought he kind of like got it and was self-aware and kind of was like making fun of that. You had like early on, like he was giving like the tour of his hotel room to Damar, or he was like doing like face masks by the pool. I was like, he was leaning into that edit, and like I felt like he was in on the joke and he was playing it up, and I enjoyed that. And last night's episode just made it clear, like, he does not get it.
No.
He just really is this privileged, rich white boy who is condescending and entitled and full of himself. I was like, we were all rooting for Bennett. I thought he was
I
in
was
on the
not
joke.
rooting for
But
Bennett.
when he moved from like kind of making fun of himself to making fun of other people, and when he got like centered on Noah, it just got mean and it got petty and it got just self-destructive. And it's like, dude, you if you knew Noah wasn't going to be the final one, he's not a threat, why waste your time on him?
Exactly. Another thing, speaking about Bennett, that really, really bothered me too, when they were all at their like artistic date, they were all blindfolded, and Bennett just came up to Tasha and kissed her. I hated that.
You could see in her body language that
Yes,
she was uncomfortable.
she
Like I
froze.
could read it.
Yes, she froze up. I'm sure she felt like pressured to kiss him
Yeah.
back. One, she didn't know who she was kissing. She was blindfolded. I just thought that was such a sick move, honestly. I mean, some people may have thought it was romantic, but it wasn't. I mean, if Tasha's been in a situation before where she might have been sexually assaulted, that's something that could be really, really triggering for her. And again, like you said, you could tell in her body language that she just really froze up, felt so uncomfortable. And I think that her reaction is a good reminder that when we're asking for consent, we need to be aware of not only that verbal communication, but that those nonverbal communications and those clues too. Because, if someone says yes to you, but they look like they're scared, they look like they're kind of standoffish, then that's probably a no.
Yeah. And if you even looked at like the context of the situation, like she was in a room full of other guys that she's dating, like they were on a group date, they were, doing things together, and he kisses her. It just felt like it was possessive even more
Yes.
than like romantic. Like, and I'm sure she felt that too. Like Bennett is trying to like establish that, she's interested in him and establish that, he's the one that she's here for. And
Yeah.
that like that just it felt so gross, and it felt so it wasn't about her, it was about him. And
It did feel gross. And you could tell, I mean, with all really every time the camera was on Bennett, you could just tell how entitled he really felt he was. They were all kind of sitting together in like a horseshoe shape at this like artist group date, and he made Noah get up and move because Noah was sitting by Tasha and he wasn't sitting by Tasha. Like, I don't know. I hope that honestly, I hope he leaves over Noah next week.
I hope they both leave, but
I hope they both leave, but if I had to choose one, it would be Bennett.
yeah, Bennett was a disaster this week, and I will not be sorry to see him go. I had rooted for him and he let me down.
I knew it. I knew from the beginning.
I knew it was going to happen. I had my hopes up and he let me down.
Mm.
The other thing that I noticed with that date, when we're talking about the art date, they had to sketch people, then they had to mold something out of clay, and then they had to make a self-portrait. But so when they walk in, they see that it's an art date, and like immediately the first thing almost every guy said was like, oh no, are we gonna have to get nude again?
Well, because the models were naked.
And the models were nude. Like, so okay, drawing from life, like whatever. That's a non-sexual form of the human body, like whatever. But it was clear the first reaction for all these guys was fear that they were going to have to be naked on camera again. And the fact that they said again, and the fact that so many of them said it, that was a 100% clue that they were not comfortable with those previous states where they had to be in little or no clothing, with the dodgeball date and then the wrestling date, or
there was something in the pool too where they wore like very little clothing.
The Speedos in the pool.
Yeah.
Like, it was clear that the guys had not been comfortable with that. And that just brings us back to what we had talked about then. Like, again, there's nothing wrong with playing strip dodgeball or whatever. There's nothing immoral.
But if you're uncomfortable,
we're not going to be Yosef here about it. But like, if they are not comfortable and they feel pressured to do it, that's not real consent, and that is not okay. And it is clear seeing their reactions on an ongoing basis, that they had not been comfortable with that. And that just makes me feel really bad about those dates.
Yeah, that I hated that too, and I definitely noticed that. I mean, that was my first reaction watching the show too. I was like, God, are these poor guys gonna have to, strip down? Are some of the guys gonna be painting some of the other guys nude? You could just tell that they were very, very uncomfortable. And then one of the guys did get naked.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that was frustrating.
it was. I
But
just
so
felt,
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
So I was watching this last night and I had a lot of thoughts about that moment. I was really frustrated watching that moment and really concerned about the ethics of consent in that situation. Later on, we get a little more information about why that contestant stripped down. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And that gave me a lot more clarity. It made me feel much more comfortable with
Hmm.
why that person. So what happened was, for his self-portrait, Ben chose to come out completely nude and like say like, I'm all my walls are down. I'm completely vulnerable to you. Like
And
I'm
this was a last
like,
minute decision too. You could see that like Ben did do a little self-portrait. It looked like he like drew out an actual photo of himself and like had all these different things kind of around it and it looked cute and I was interested in seeing that. And then yeah, he just, took all of his clothes off in the middle of the room.
yeah,
Not only exposed himself to Tasha, but all of the guys in the room.
right. And that frankly is sexual harassment, if not sexual abuse. Like having to see someone naked without knowing that that was going to be what happens, or not being able to say that you're okay with that. That's unacceptable. That's not okay. That's frankly illegal. Like if that were a stranger who had walked in and done that, we would call them a flasher. We would have arrested them for
Exactly.
exposure. So like I said, like later on, Ben explains why he did that and what it meant to him. And like, okay, I see what it meant now. And that's really powerful. But in that moment, one, we didn't have that explanation. And even if we'd had that explanation, that still doesn't make it okay for you to
Yeah,
undress in front of someone without their consent. Like, that's just
exactly.
Aisha, but also all the other guys. Like, that is not okay to do
Well,
that. And that was
yeah,
just such a moment. I was like, wait, are we just going to gloss over the fact that there was no consent in this moment?
Yeah, I had a lot of the same thoughts you did, but something that happened kind of directly after that, Tasha kind of went into what looked like a back room and was really emotional.
Hmm.
And, she was talking to like the artistic help and told her, like, oh, all of these guys were so vulnerable. Like, I'm so lucky to be in this room. But I'm like, did your emotions start? Like, did you start becoming emotional because of what Ben did? Because it was, I mean, it caught her very off guard. It caught all the other guys off guard. And again, without the I can't speak.
Explanation.
Thank you. I cannot speak. Without that, it really just seemed like Ben was,
And again, maybe that explanation was in there.
yeah.
Maybe everyone like was prepped like, hey, this is going to be what Ben's going to do. Are you all comfortable with that? Like maybe that happened, but again, we didn't
But
get
I'd
to
like
see
to
it.
see
So
that.
for the purpose of valuing consent, if we don't get to see that that happens, then that doesn't
It
send a
doesn't
message to our kids that this is important. And
exactly.
one of the things that bothered me so much about this, more than almost anything else, I mean, more than like there's an issue with consent there, but really what message that sent me was, and again, this is not personal at Ben because I understand Ben's reasoning and Ben's reasoning is solid and we'll talk about that more. But just this idea that so often we do see people who are co-opting this language of vulnerability and the language around feminism and growth and openness and using that as a way to gaslight their partner. Like if someone says, well, you can't criticize me, like I'm going through something right now, or like
Hmm.
like someone acts abusively towards their partner and
And
then says,
uses it as
I
an
was
excuse.
yeah, I was traumatized in my past, so like I'm just acting out of that, so you can't be mad at me, or like, well, I'm just being vulnerable with you, that's why I undressed in front of you without your consent. Like I have met people who have done that. It's not, abuse doesn't just look like someone who is forcing you to do something, or someone who is like saying, if you don't let me do this, I'm going to beat you up. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it looks like someone saying, oh, this super abusive thing I did, well, you can't be mad at me for it. You can't judge me for it because I just did it because of my trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Your trauma doesn't give you an excuse to traumatize someone else. And I've
Exactly.
been seeing more and more as that kind of language and understanding of trauma has become more mainstream. I've seen abusers co-opting that and using that as an excuse or gaslighting their partner with that. So again, not Ben's intention in that moment, but it does send that message of like, well, it was okay for him to just totally get undressed in front of her because he was being vulnerable.
Yeah.
No, it's still sexual abuse. You don't get to do that and then say, I was just letting my walls down. No,
Yeah.
it's still a crime.
Yeah, I mean, later, you're right. It did make sense why Ben did what he did and why that was his self-portrait. Ben really opened up, as a lot of guys did on this episode, and Ben talked about how he struggled with bulimia for years. He said he was never comfortable in his body. He said that he felt like a lot of social pressures to look a certain way. So for him to be completely nude, comfortable in front of people in his own skin, in his body, it made sense, but again, without that reasoning behind it, it was a little difficult.
Yeah. So let's flip gears and talk, because there was so much that was good in last night's episode, and it feels so weird to have so many good things to talk about in a
Yeah,
bachelorette. But that vulnerability was amazing. And like you said, like starting with Ben, okay, I didn't love what we got to see of how consent played into his vulnerability. However,
mhm.
talking about men having eating disorders on national TV, I can't think of a time that that has happened. And especially
That's the
for
first
like
time I've
a
ever seen that on TV.
straight, conventionally attractive, jacked man to be able to be talking about like, yeah, guys like me struggle with this too, because I think we don't talk about that very often. And if we ever do talk about men having body issues, a lot of times we're focusing on like body issues within the queer community, and we're not just
Exactly.
generally like, I don't think, I think there's this cultural stereotype that girls have eating disorders. Girls
Exactly.
have disordered eating, girls have body dysmorphic disorder, or girls have negative body self-image, but it is so common for guys to have that as well. I was looking up some statistics around this, and from the National Eating Disorder Awareness Organization, NEDA, they said as many as 1 in 3 guys
Yeah.
experience disordered eating or an eating disorder at some point in their lives. Like that is so common. And for this to be really the first time I can think of mainstream TV, a guy opening up about an eating disorder and having that being treated with respect and vulnerability. And the other thing he said that really stuck with me is he mentioned that, like, he said his sister was the only one who knew about it and she saved his life.
Hmm.
I think people think of eating disorders, if they haven't experienced it or don't know someone who's experienced it, they might think of it as like not that serious, or like more of a cosmetic issue, or like a
Hmm.
mindset issue. It literally can be a life or death issue. It is so
Exactly.
dangerous. So many people die from eating disorders or the associated medical conditions that come from disordered eating. So for him to say that like his sister saved his life, that's not an exaggeration. Eating disorders kill people. So
Yeah.
for him to open up about that, I was blown away to see that conversation on our TVs.
I was too, and I'm really proud of. I mean, I feel like TV lately, especially at the end of this year, has really given people the platform to open up about different issues, whether that's eating disorders, addiction, race issues, things within the LGBT community. And we talked a little bit before this, and you said that was something that the Bachelor Nation had never done before. So I am proud, and I'm glad that they gave Ben that platform because, like you said, guys have such a hard time, or society puts this pressure on guys to come forward about things like eating disorders, things like sexual abuse, and now that we are getting to a point where we're more open to talk about this, men who struggle with this can get the help that they need without feeling shamed. So
Yes.
I am really, really proud of Ben for talking about that. And I'm proud of ABC Bachelor Nation for airing really everything that we talked about. Something else that I really was glad to see was when Zach was talking about his issues with addiction. He talked about how it is a disease, addiction, drug use, that is very much a disease, just like alcoholism, just like eating disorders. But he talked about how he had been in and out of rehab a few times. And again, just a conversation that I think is so important for TV, so important for anyone watching that to feel like things, you know, if they're going through that these issues are normalized. It when people talk about these things, others can look up to them, to it might make them feel like they're not alone. So I was glad to see that too.
Yeah, it just breaks that stigma around these ideas that like, oh, this isn't something we talk about or this isn't something that happens. It reduces that stigma. So if someone watching who's going through the same thing sees that and thinks, wow, if he can talk about it, maybe I can too. And we
Yeah.
saw that with Ben talking about just eating disorders, with Zach talking about addiction. We saw Riley talking about issues with his family relationships. We saw
Like,
Blake M talking about growing up in a home where there was abuse happening, and I think he described it as like the chaos of his home and how he wanted to break that cycle of abuse. And that's something we talk about all the time. That idea that like we it's so easy to become what we see. So when kids grow up in abusive homes, they know what's going on. They experience that. They feel that even if they're not directly abused themselves, they feel that chaos in the home. They feel that abuse. And so for him to talk about that and to say that he wanted to break that cycle, there was just so much vulnerability happening, so much, so many of those conversations that need to just be so open. And I was so glad to see that. And then not only to
mhm,
see that those conversations were allowed to happen and to be normalized, but also to normalize all the guys supporting each other throughout that, because they most of them were sharing all of these things not just with Tasha,
together.
but with the whole group. And at one point, like, Brendan turned to Riley and told him that like he was getting choked up by his story and like thanked him for sharing that. Like, they all kind of rallied around each other, and
Yeah.
just like that, showing each other that like they can support each other, they can be vulnerable with other men, and that as other men, when they see that vulnerability, they can be empathetic
Mhm.
and supportive. And it just gave this chance for us as a nation to see men being vulnerable and supportive and emotional together. And again, like,
Yeah.
as a woman, people just expect me to be emotional when I am. Like, that's no surprise. No one is shocked by that. Like, I know it's okay for me to be emotional, but I think a lot of men grow up not feeling like that's allowed. And so to show that, to show them
Mhm.
like being bros together and being friends, and how that friendship means supporting each other through this emotional stuff, like, that's just such a positive image of masculinity to put out there as an example. And that's what we've been asking ABC to do. And like, I just felt like this episode was such a good example of non-toxic masculinity, of healthy
Yeah.
masculinity, of guys tapping down deep into their own emotional core and then supporting each other through that. I loved
Yeah.
getting to see that.
Overall, I feel like this group of guys, I mean, again, this is my first time watching The Bachelorette, but compared to things I've heard, I feel like this group is a good group. Like,
Yeah.
the majority of them seem like they have such good qualities. I don't know. I really appreciate a lot of the conversations that they've had with each other, that they've had with Tasha. I feel like they think they're bonded a little bit more than maybe other guys on other seasons because of the whole Claire situation, but I
Yeah,
like seeing it.
I think on the one hand, like, we have these guys who are pretty incredible.
Hmm.
And kudos to them for being in a place where they're able to open up individually. But also, I think there has just been some social pressure towards ABC, that I'm sure there were good guys on seasons in the past, and ABC just didn't edit the show this way and didn't show us this, or didn't encourage this kind of interaction. They
Hmm.
encouraged the guys to pick at each other, encouraged the guys to feel competitive. We even saw that at the beginning of Tasha's season. It was all competitive dates. It was all sports. It was all, fights. And now we're getting this emotional side. And I think it is some of this like social pressure that we know that we have to let men see more. We have to let our
Yeah.
boys see more than that. So I think part of it is these are really solid guys that we have on this season. And part of it is that ABC hopefully is being pushed to know that you can't just say guys are tough fighters who want to win the girl. We can't have that vision anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm loving this season. I
Yeah.
love getting to see those supportive, healthy relationships. And I think whatever relationship Tasha ends up in will be better for having had these conversations.
I agree. With that, I'm gonna give the rose. I'm
Can
gonna
I do
give
the
that.
bad one first? Because let's
Yeah.
end on a high note, because it's been
Yeah.
good. All
Yeah.
right. I'm going to give the bad rose to Bennett. Is that who we're giving? Yeah, to Bennett.
Yeah.
We talked about this. As the previous Bennett champion, I am cutting him down from his throne. Bennett, you are
Good.
canceled. You're done. Um, you couldn't even admit that you have privilege. There is nothing wrong with saying that you have privilege. It's not something that you chose. You know, so many of us are born into aspects of privilege, whether that's white privilege, whether that's straight privilege, whether that's cisgender privilege. You know, you didn't choose to be born straight and white or cisgendered and white or wealthy. You know, these are just the way you were born. It's the genetic, you know, just lottery. It's what happens. However, if you can't even admit that you have that privilege, like, Bennett, you're a rich dude who went to a rich white dude who went to Harvard. You've got some privilege. Own it and then use that for good. The fact that you can't even admit that you have that privilege, just you're not going to do anything good till you can get past that. So, dead rose to Bennett. I hope this
Good.
is the last time we have to talk about you.
I do too. So I am gonna give the rose to Blake. Blake has been someone who I really liked at Claire's season, then I didn't so much like him during this portion of Tasha's season. Still not a huge Blake fan, but what I did appreciate about him at this last episode was that conversation, Linnea, like you said, about the cycle of violence that he saw within his own family and within his home. He talked a lot about how he wanted to break that cycle, how it was important to recognize, you know, maybe when he was feeling emotional and when he, you know, he it seems like he's doing everything in his power to really to reverse the way and his thinking that stemmed from everything that happened in his childhood. It sounds like he did grow up in a really chaotic, abusive household, and he said he doesn't want that for himself. He doesn't want that for his future. And I don't know, I really appreciate that. I'm glad that people are talking about the cycle of violence. I'm glad that people are talking about domestic violence within the home because we know it happens so often. So, good job, Blake. Thanks.
Way to go.
Good job, Blake.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We will be back next week for the next episode of The Bachelor. We're slowly winding our way through this season, and in a million years it will be over, and then we'll be on to the next one. So,
Yep.
before we sign off, for anyone who made it through this part of the video, we do want to remind you we are doing a holiday tree fundraiser on our Facebook right now. So if you want to pop over, currently at the time of recording, we're working on raising the money to put the tinsel on our tree. So if we get another $50, we will put tinsel on our tree, be one step closer. After that, it's just one more step to getting our tree topper on. And then we will be hanging ornaments and just having some holly jolly holiday cheer, providing some gifts and some support for our clients this holiday season. So if you haven't had a chance to check out that fundraiser, pop over to our Facebook. $5 gets us one step closer to that tinsel on our tree, and then our tree topper. We would love to have you join us. So pop over to our holiday giving event on our Facebook, and we will look forward to seeing you there, and we'll see you next week.